I noticed there's alcohol bottles and just drugs all across this table, and I asked him, I said, you know what, Dad, what are you doing? And so he looks at me and he grabs a pinch of this cocaine powder. It's on the table, and he shoves it down my throat, and he tells me, you know what, son, you don't ever question me. So one of the first memories of my life, I remember being 3 years old, having my first experience with drugs. My dad, he had stolen me from a church my mom was going to, and he fled up the state of California. And so we're staying in a hotel, and one of these nights I wake up in the middle of the night, and I see him sitting on a table. And I walk up to him. I notice there's alcohol bottles and just drugs all across this table, and I asked him, I said, you know what, Dad, what are you doing? And so he looks at me and he grabs a pinch of this cocaine powder. It's on the table, and he shoves it down my throat, and he tells me, you know what, son, you don't ever question me. A year later, I can remember my dad, he and my mom had tried to mend things, and so he was back at the house. I did something to upset him, and he gets enraged. He comes and he backhands me on the side of the face. And my mom, she comes and steps in, tries to come to my aid, and I remember him just grabbing her by the throat and walking her to the window. She'd just gotten out of the shower, and so he throws her through this window, and her towel, it gets caught on this window, on the glass, and so she's outside, she's unclothed, and I can remember hearing her scream, the shriek of my mom screaming, and she's pounding on the door, trying to get in. My dad, he'd locked the door, he wasn't letting her in. And so hearing that shriek and that pounding, it was like hearing the heartbeat of hell. And I had nightmares about that experience my whole life, all through my teenage years. Those experiences, they drove me into a rebellious lifestyle. I was completely submerged in alcohol and drugs by the time I was in my teenage years. And they started small, but they grew eventually. They dominated my life. I couldn't stop. It went from one thing to the next. Pretty soon I was partying all the time and just completely submerged in a lifestyle I never thought I would live in. Shortly after that, I met my wife. At the time, she was not saved either, and so we were both living rebellious lives. And she gets saved about a year later, and we have our kids. And so she's going to church regularly, and I'm not. I'm fighting church, I'm fighting God. But I remember her coming home one day, and she'd been crying, I could tell, and so I asked her what's wrong. And so we sit down on the bed, and she tells me, you know what, Lem, I'm not happy with your decisions. The decisions you're making, they're going to take you straight to hell, but if you want to go to hell, that's on you. But I want you to know something, that your two daughters are in that room right over there, and they're watching you. And so just know that your decisions you make, they're going to take your two daughters straight to hell with you. And that was it. That was what I needed to hear. I surrendered my life. I gave my life to Christ, and it's been just the best decision I've ever made. It restored just that void inside of my heart and gave me purpose and direction in life.